In this video, I'm going to show you 5 new discoveries I've made with OP-1. We're going to look at 5 different ways you can exploit its features to do surprising and cool things. First, we're going to look at the grid effect. Normally, this sounds like a noisy reverb, and it's cool, but I found out that there is a way to set it that will sound like a bit crusher effect. I'm not saying that it is actually doing what a bit crusher does. I don't know what it's actually doing. I'm just saying there is a way to set it that will sort of turn it into a bit crusher. And the trick is
make the X, Y, and Z values low and the mix high.
And then if you go into the OP-1 sampler engine, one of the samples they give you is a piano. And if you run the grid to sound like a bit crusher on that piano sample, it'll end up sounding like the piano sound in like an old Casio toy. That's a harsh sound, but I've always considered it a classic. And if you build a track around it, it can be very charming. Next, we're going to look at the delay effect. The unusual thing here is the blue value, which like changes the number of radar circles. And I don't even really understand exactly what's happening there, but it has an effect that's sort of like changing the tap value, or it's almost like messing with the number of tape heads in a multiple tape head delay, kind of. But the cool thing to do with this is to set up a delay sound and then use the OP-1's modulator section, or like the LFO section, to continually change the blue value. And if you do that, the whole like repeat pattern will continually change while you play, and that's a cool effect. Next, we're going to talk about the tombola. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the thing I'm talking about here is one of the sequencers. Specifically, it's the one that's like a spinning circle, and anytime you push a note, it drops a marble in the circle. And then anytime the marble bounces against the rim of the circle, it'll trigger the note you just played. And you can put up to 16 marbles in it. If you put in a 17th marble, it'll just replace whatever the first one was. So I think the coolest thing to do with this is to fill it up with notes that will all just spell out one single chord. So for instance, I picked a E major, so I just filled it up with E's, G sharps, and B's, which will sort of randomly collide together and produce this larger, like randomly generated E major chord. But actually, the cool thing I did was I only used 14 of the 16 slots on those notes. And then for my last 2 slots, I also added 1 D sharp and 1 F sharp, which makes it very subtly a major 9th chord. But the other notes dominate, so it's like mostly an E major chord. And then the finishing touch here is that I went into the envelope section and sculpted that so that the onset of every marble note fades in. And if you do all those things and you let it sort of randomly spin out this subtle E major 9 chord, it sounds like a Mirage. The OP-1 lets you use Portamento, where if you play one note and then you play another note, it'll slide from the first one to the second one. But one cool thing it does is it'll let you do that even if you play chords. So if you play one chord and then another chord, each of the notes of the two chords will slide. And that just sounds cool, especially if you make the Portamento really slow. This pro tip is just that. You should do that. The OP-1 has a built-in tremolo effect, but the interesting thing about it is that if you play more than one note at a time, the tremolo effect will trigger independently for each note. So if you play all the notes simultaneously, you won't really notice, and it'll just sound like a normal tremolo effect. But if you stagger the notes, you can hear that each one will be tremoloing on its own cycle. So I think the cool thing to do here is to choose a tremolo wave shape like a ramp, and then play chords where you make sure you stagger the notes. And the reason I think this is cool is that I'm not a very good keyboard player, and so I spend a lot of time just like holding chords down. But if you do this while you're holding a chord, it'll make the held chord sound more interesting. It'll give it a sort of rhythmic activity. It'll make it sound like you're doing more than you are.